Hi, y'all. Welcome to week 3, which starts on Tuesday this week because Monday is Labor Day. And I hope everybody had a good and relaxing, if at all possible, 3-day weekend. And now this week, we are looking at kind of the addiction and the brain. And there's always the age old debate of, is addiction a choice or is addiction a disease? And the answer is, as you get further and further addicted, the brain is changing. So the brain is doing what the brain does to achieve homeostasis, and that becomes a problem because the thing that relieved tension, made things fun, is no longer having the same impact. So as you're doing the reading and looking at the videos, remember that we're looking at this as a big picture, because although for some people taking that first drink was a choice, or shooting, I'm going to get my terminology wrong, doing that first use of substance is a choice, what the brain adapts to almost becomes an automatic pilot thing. And then recovery is a choice, but it's hard and it's scary. And so the fight for recovery and being sober, we've got to remember that the brain is playing some self-protection in that, because it's trying to figure out what's going on with substance and no substance and stuff like that. So in your reading, she talks a lot about what goes on in the brain and how the central nervous system is looking for adaptation, and how it does that, and how we get a new word, tachyphylaxis, and just how that is, it's building up tolerance, but it's that ebb and flow of the brain of wanting to find balance and how to use it. So I encourage you to do all the stuff this week. There's 2 videos and 2 reading assignments, as well as chapter 2 in the book, but they all work together and they all reinforce each other. And if you know anything about learning theory, the more that your brain builds files and then adds to the file, the more that it integrates into your knowledge, and you kind of synthesize that into your ability to recall. And this week is all building on that. So if you look at the National, I have to look at this, National Institute on Drug Abuse, and their writings here, they do some cool stuff in trying to explain this. And so in the textbook, she's talking about the impact on the brain and that inverted U, and how it all plays out in people's actions and reactions in the brain response. And this explains it even more and gives you more examples, so it builds on that knowledge. In the World According to Me, and you don't have to do this in any order, I would read the book first, watch the videos, and then read these, because I feel like these solidify it and make it just kind of a nice balance thing. But for anybody that's going into counseling or people helping, understanding how the brain works is a huge thing, because even outside of addiction, understanding the neurotransmitters and the neuros and the receptors is huge in explaining antidepressants and what the brain does and how there's a chemical reaction in the brain. And so this is all that same information, and the more you understand it, the easier it will be when you get into your master's program and you're learning all this, because you already have foundational knowledge. And they do a super good job. I'm going to see how many different things I say they do a super good job of explaining things. Feel free to count them. So I don't know if you guys can see, I just had an email pop up. I made my screen too big. If you can, laugh. If you can't, laugh at me. It's all good. But what they're doing in this, and they're explaining the brain and the parts of the brain in what I think is a super understandable way. And so it reinforces what she's saying in the book, and kind of enlightens what she's saying in the book even more. And then how all this is impacted by drug use and substances, and how it almost takes life and form of its own in the brain, so that a person is doing what the brain is basically telling them to do. which doesn't then relieve them of the responsibility of seeking out help and seeking out healing and recovery. But it also makes us more understanding of how super hard that is, because they're fighting against their own brain. And if you think about the amygdala, so if you haven't learned about the amygdala yet, it's our fight, flight, or freeze reaction in the very back of the brain. It's back here. And it's part of the reason in like CBT or any of those type theories that we do stuff that we don't necessarily, that doesn't always make sense to us, in the sense that you're getting ready to take a test and all of a sudden you're feeling like, oh crap, I can't do this. So you don't answer anything. And then you leave the test and you know you knew the answers, but that's because your brain got stuck in the amygdala. And so, and decided running was the best answer. So in CBT, we learned how to get into the prefrontal cortex. Unfortunately, drugs and substances kind of disrupt the circuitry, so you can't logic yourself out of it and you can't prefrontal cortex your way out of it. And so in this line here, it says shifting balance between the circuit and the circuits of the basal ganglia and extended amygdala make a person with substance use disorder seek the drug compulsively with reduced impulse control, because the prefrontal cortex isn't online and the amygdala is kind of freaking out saying, I need this. And then the other interesting thing with the extended amygdala right here is where it says the circuit becomes increasingly sensitive to increased drug use. Over time, a person with substance use disorder uses drugs to get temporary relief from discomfort. So what started out potentially as a fun high to relieve, stress and anxiety and make a person happy is now doing almost exactly the opposite. So I won't read this article to you. I just really, really like it. And so it has great visuals with it, so that if you are both a right and left brain person, you can see and envision some things that she talks about in the book. Mine's on Kindle, that's why I'm showing you my phone. So they kind of nicely reinforce each other. There's another NIDA article, and it has the brain scans of how drugs interact with the brain and brain activity. And it's got some good understanding of why people are drawn to drugs, even though, stuff like this is all over the internet. People are still drawn to drugs and substances because of the initial relaxing or happy effects of them. And then it discusses about why some people become addicted and some people don't. And it really comes down to protective factors versus risk factors. And if you've done any work in resiliency, this is very similar to resiliency. And so you'll see some correlation there, which will then also be helpful as you go further on in people helping, or if you're nursing or medical field, and understanding this definition of resiliency, which is also then going to be the same resiliency you learn in other applications. So, another good article. I am going to put on the Canvas page. So they also have a PDF with kind of all this information written together. I'm going to put that on the Canvas site. You do not have to read it if you don't want to. Cat crossing, sorry. I just think it's a really good resource to have, and one of those things you can save and look at later because it's got great information. Then other thing that you'll be doing is watching two videos. One is more the 5-minute lighthearted explanation video with pictures, and we all know that I love pictures, so I'm going to tell you it's wonderful because I like pictures. The other one is a 15-minute, so that first one is from TED Ed, and then the second one is about 15 minutes, is from TED Med, and is a doctor explaining the brain function and addiction, but she also then talks about how overeating can also come into play, and her correlations are interesting. She is a little more wordy, but if you can kind of keep yourself engaged in it, she's got some super cool information. So then as you're thinking about all this stuff, thinking about the implications on real life, because this is all great theoretical information. But what does it mean when you're working with somebody that has a substance use issue or substance addiction or family member, whatever? How do all these parts of the brain come into play? And we're going to talk about this more, so don't feel like you have to have total working knowledge on this yet. But what does it mean when the brain is reaching for homeostasis, and then as a substance is added in, almost fighting against the substance, but fighting against the person? And what is that implication for the person you're working with? So one of your assignments is the reading reflection. And so thinking about that as you're writing, that's one of the things I'll look for is, how are you integrating this? If you just have it as factual knowledge, that's great. It's good information. But if you're going into people helping or nursing or some sort of social services, understanding this information and the impact it has on people. Now, we're not to the point yet where we're talking about what to do with it, so I'm not looking for you to go, and then I would do this, this, and this. But just, what does all this mean when you're working with somebody? And reminding yourself learning is an ongoing thing, so we will learn more and more about this. Now I'm just looking at my notes because I should have been looking at my notes the whole time, but I wasn't. But let's see if I missed anything. I think I said this, but just in case I didn't, remembering that continued substance use causes change in the brain, and over time, that brain change, the brain changes because of the substance use, making the person more at risk for ongoing substance use because the brain is then needing it to waylay the negative symptomology, but also harder to recover. And so part of that is then makes it harder to make a choice to get into a recovery program, because the brain is like, what will I do without this? Can I handle this? And all those questions. Excuse me. So I think that's everything. If you have any questions, email me, and do the reading reflection, and kind of process all of what this means. But don't panic that you don't know how to fix it, and that right now the brain's still kind of, there's more to learn on the impact of the brain. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Thanks. Email me with questions. Have a great week.